Thank you. So once again, good morning, everyone, and happy Friday. Thank you for joining another session of Azure Power Lunch. And this call is being recorded, and we will place our recording on our YouTube channel. If you don't want to be recorded, you may want to drop off now. Also, this call is joined by our Microsoft team members as well as members from our customers and partners. So as usual, um, a quick overview of the topic. Topic is Azure Data Explorer updates. And just like we always do, we are going to do a quick lap around what is um, that service that we are talking about, just a quick level set. Then we will go over some of the key updates and more, and then go from there. Hopefully, mostly it's going to be demo, just a few slides for reference, and that's pretty much it. So with that, so let's talk about what is Azure Data Explorer is. Azure Data Explorer is Microsoft first-party services for big data analytics. It's a platform as a service, doesn't kind of require you to, provision any hardware, install software. You just provision the service, and you can set up its characteristic, what type of SKU you want. You spin it up, you load your data, and that's it. You start doing queries. This is basically, and just in regards to some of the kind of a number, um, you can do queries on very large amounts of data really, really fast. So that's where you have like kind of a large amount of JSON data, billions and billions of record. You want to do the queries in a matter of few seconds. Data Explorer is your tool. And if you don't already know, it is the underlying platform for a number of services like Azure Monitor, um, uh, time series insights and things like that. So, or application insights as well. So this is the underlying platform on which those services are built. So let's say if you want to build your own platform for something like analytics, pouring large amounts of data, doing graphs and all that, Azure Data Explorer is your tool. Okay. And I really like this diagram because, to be honest, I'm not a data person. I'm an app and infra background. But this, I mean, how simply this picture describes this tool, it's kind of amazing. What you do is you go into Azure portal. You basically create a cluster. You provision a database inside it, and from that point on, you can load your data either directly into it or ingest data from existing tables or from streaming data from Event Hub, IoT hubs, whatever you want. Okay. Once that data is there, you can start doing queries on that data, and you can start basically um, getting insights into it. You can generate graphs. It uses this custom query language, and that's a kind of think of it as similar to SQL. Very simple to use. The tools have kind of insights built into it, so you can kind of intelligence built into it, so you can quickly write those queries. So that's what this platform kind of does at a higher level. Okay, so any questions at the moment? Okay, so with that, so let's talk about I mean, what are some of the kind of key changes that come into this
Hey,
have
Ravi,
kind of a, yes, please go
I
ahead.
just have a real quick question.
Mhm.
When do we decide that we need to use Data Explorer versus a similar model we used to do for Data Lake, like, ingest to Data Lake and then run, faster queries to get data because it's a big data platform. So just want to understand.
Yeah, so I think a data lake is where your data is stored, and it allows you to, and basically, Azure Data Explorer allows you to query that data. So data lake probably will be a platform that you have long-term data, and then that Data Explorer is to query that data. Think of it Splunk. You know, the way
Right.
you use Splunk, exactly, it's a direct competitor to Splunk. You know, so that's kind of um,
So basically,
yeah,
is our guideline that bring data from different data sources to data lake and
yeah.
then send it to Data Explorer?
You can. I mean, or
Okay.
you can directly bring in to Data Explorer. I mean, as you can see, it can inject data from Event Hub, Queue, Blob, Data Lake, all that. Yeah, it can use link table as well. Just keep in mind. I mean, and by the way, and I really want to apologize. Some of the answer I may not have because, as I said, I'm not a data person. I am working with a few customers, and that's where this whole thing came up about. Like they suddenly started interested in Azure Data Explorer because of some of the updates. So I may not have some of the answer in that regard, but you can use attached table, external tables. The query performance will not be as good as if the data is already indexed by the Azure Data Explorer. But yes, you can use external tables as well. Okay. So with that, any other questions? Okay. So with that, what are some of the changes that have been, or not, updates that have been made to the service? So, enterprises, when we talk about large enterprises, they have security compliance uh, guidelines which are very extensive, and they want to make sure that the services they use, they meet those guidelines. So one of the things was with Azure Data Explorer, a number of customers wanted to have more control over it. So the one option was to deploy it inside a VNET, VNET injected model. And that model was kind of uh, adopted, but at the same time, it required a lot of ports to open because the traffic, the management traffic of Data Explorer was going over customer network. So they have to open kind of NSG ports for storage, and that was a big data exfiltration risk in the eyes of the customers. Okay, so that's where this new model comes in, where you can deploy an Azure Data Explorer in the cloud in a multi-tenant environment, and you can create private endpoints to it. So once again, this is the private endpoint to initiate traffic towards the Data Explorer, either to query or to push data into it. Okay, so that's one part of it. And on the other hand, Azure Data Explorer makes it possible to ingest data. So basically, this is Azure Data Explorer ingesting data from sources like Event Hub, like storage, like IoT Hub, or SQL over private endpoint. And these are called managed private endpoints. So I just want to make sure everybody understands it. There are two type of private endpoints we are talking about. One, where a consumer is talking to Azure Data Explorer. That's where they create this private endpoint, as you can see here in the client VNet, where you create a private endpoint, and that's where you can either query the data or push data through its APIs. Okay, that's one way of doing it. Second part is where Azure Data Explorer is initiating the conversation with sources, streaming sources like Event Hub, or sources like blobs data like Azure Storage or Azure SQL, where it will consume that data. Okay, so these are the two. That is called a managed private endpoint. So that support, with that support, there is no need to set up any, I mean, you can lock down your cluster. You can say, okay, there's no public access. It's only used by, your customer, and you can basically, and we will take a look at it, and you can basically lock down all external traffic. Okay, so that's makes it very enterprise friendly, and and make sure that it can meet the security, privacy, and compliance guidelines of large customers. So let's quickly jump into the demos, so we can kind of take a look at it. In regards to the uh, creation experience, let me just go into the cluster. So I have already created a cluster. Um, in that cluster, as you can see, I am doing a dev cluster, and let's take a look at the creation experience for 1 minute. So just to give you an idea, we're not going to create it. We just want to see what options comes into picture. So we're just going to say Azure Data Explorer, okay, and we say create. Pretty boilerplate stuff, and we are going to pick, okay, and we're going to call it L demo 01. We will pick, let's say, South Central. Okay, sorry, not South Central. Okay, okay, that's where you will identify what type of SKU. Just keep in mind, this will just create instance for you underneath. You can change them later on. So it is not something fixed. This is just to start. So for example, if you're just playing with it, I will highly recommend you use dev test. It doesn't have an SLA, and uh, use kind of use a hardware underlying compute SKU is not very large, so you don't get charges. Okay, so you can use dev test, as you can see here, um, and you can use that SKU availability zone that is supported built in there. And this is one other thing. This is very powerful. Either you can scale manually, so you can go in and you can manually scale the underlying instances. And just keep that in mind that when you scale underlying instances, uh, that tells you like how much data you're processing. So if you're processing a large amounts of data, that's where you may want to scale up those instances, or if you're ingesting large amounts of data. So for that, you need to scale up. So that's where this manual scaling comes into picture. On the other hand, it has optimized scaling as well. So what optimized scaling is, it will monitor how you are doing manual scaling. So let's say you're using a cluster for a few months and you are scaling it up and down, and then and this thing is learning, and it will learn like, okay, you scale your cluster up probably when the load is that much. So then it will automatically start scaling your cluster. So think of it as kind of a predictive scaling, you know. So that's a very powerful feature. Um, in regards to configuration, this is auto stop. So this is once again a very important thing in cost saving. It will auto stop your cluster if it is not getting any. So let's say if there is no data ingestion, nobody's querying. I think there is a factor. I think some time has elapsed, it will stop the cluster. Just keep in mind, it will not auto start it. You have to go in and start it up. So probably for dev cluster or the cluster that you are using occasionally, it may be a good idea to use this auto stop feature. Okay. Security. Just keep in mind, there are two types of data there are two ways it stores your data. One type of data is stored in your storage account. This is the permanent storage. When you push data into Azure Data Explorer, behind the scene, it is storing data into a storage account. Okay, that data you can encrypt using customer managed keys, and you should do that with Key Vault. So that you should do that use, and you, of course, the whole thing, you should set up system managed identity for your cluster, use that identity to access keys from the key vault and do all that stuff. That absolutely you should do. The second piece of data resides on the disk of the compute that is running. This is basically caching data, okay, or cache data, I should say. I'm sorry, cache data that will go away when your cluster stop, or if scales up or down, it may disappear. So that data is encrypted with Microsoft Managed Key. At the moment, there is no support for customer managed key. Okay, so just verify. Let's quickly move on to the network piece. So this is what I was talking about. You can do public, which is basically all network. You can access it over the internet. VNet injection, this was the old option, or this previous option that I talked about, where it will deploy it into a cluster. Just keep in mind, you have to open a lot of NSGs for management traffic to go back and forth. And that was something that some of the enterprises did not want to do. And this is the option that we have today, which is private endpoint support. So now you can connect to it over a private endpoint, and all communication that happens from ADX to other services, it can happen over managed private endpoints. Okay, so that's a big deal. And then, of course, you have diagnostic settings and all that. So just want to mention it. So, and with that, let's move on. I'm not going to actually create a cluster. We already have a cluster since it takes time. So let's take a look at that. Okay. So, by the way, any questions? So let's look at the networking tab. As you can see, once you create a cluster, you can enable or disable public network access. At this moment, I have disabled the public network access. Of course, I have enabled it from my IP address. Basically, this is from my home IP address. So this is that address. So that's I have enabled. All the other addresses, this is disabled. Okay, um, and that I have created a private endpoint. So I have created a private endpoint in a VNet where I have a deployed a VM and all that, and from that VM I can connect to this. This is the VNet where I have deployed that private endpoint. And just keep in mind, look at the DNS configuration for this private endpoint. There is not one. I mean, normally when you create a private endpoint and create one virtual NIC, and you will have it has these number of IP addresses, man. So just keep in mind, one guidance is when you are creating a private endpoint, just make sure there is enough space for those IP addresses to be created. Otherwise, private endpoint creation will fail. I mean, as you can see here, they're almost like 8 endpoints which have been created there. Okay, so these all of these endpoints are there, and they are basically tied to private DNS zones, which are connected to that particular VNet. So if you are doing it in Azure, this private endpoint, and using the private DNS zone, it will automatically set up. If you are doing it in your own VNet, and you are doing your custom DNS, then you will have to make sure that you create these DNS entries in your custom DNS. Okay. So with that, at that moment, access, um, you will be able to access the cluster through that private endpoint, and nobody outside that will be able to access it. Okay. So for example, here, let me just move this remote desktop. So here is the remote desktop. And here is this is the Azure Data Explorer query UI that I'm running. And I am running from that VM, which has access to that private endpoint. And as you can see, I can, I have some sample data loaded. I can run queries. I have this test table as well. I can run queries and it shows me these results. I can go into here and I can create, nice pie chart graphs. And by the way, the scope of the please of scope of this 30-minute session is not to go over this language, but just to give you an idea that I am able to connect from um, through this private endpoint from a VM that is that has access that is in the same VNet where the private endpoint is. Okay, so that's that. Um, let's um, let's talk about one more thing, and I need to hold on. And here we go. Okay, so that's that. Second part is how you connect to different sources this from this Azure Data Explorer. So that's where managed private endpoint comes into picture. So let's go back to our cluster. This is the second piece, managed private endpoint. Okay, so these are the private endpoint where through which ADX is calling. I have already created one for Event Hub, and the process is very simple. You go in here, you choose a name, so you can call it PHP2, and then you will pick the resource. And these are the resource that you can create private endpoints to. Of course, Event Hub, Storage Account, IoT Hub, Key Vault, SQL Server, and other clusters. So these are other Data Explorer cluster that you want to connect to. In that case, you can do that connection as well. So basically, you will pick up Event Hub. It will ask you what is the Event Hub name, and then you pick up namespace and you create it. Just keep in mind that this is not auto creation, it's a manual creation. So once you create the private endpoint, you will have to go to the resource to approve it. Okay. So if you see that private endpoint is being created and it's staying in the pending state, you will have to go to the resource itself and approve it. Okay. So that's the key requirement here. So just be aware of that. So once that is there, then you will be able to connect to this particular resource over a private endpoint. Just like I can show it to you here. I have this Event Hub namespace, and I have an Event Hub. And in the networking, as you can see, I have disabled all public network access. The only access I have is from two private endpoints. That's it. One to write data to it, and the other one, which is ADX, which is reading data from it. That's it. So basically, that's how I'm securely connecting my Event Hub to Azure Data Explorer. All over private endpoints, no traffic going over public internet. Okay, so that's that. So once again, I have let me take you here. I mean, I have this small Visual Studio application. It's just running some kind of a sending some data to the Event Hub. And by the way, it takes a few minutes before data appears and shows up in the um, in Azure Data Explorer. So remember, if you remember, we ran this query a few minutes ago, and it was showing. So in a few minutes it will show the other results. So it is showing 900. I think we added 100 records, so it will show other results in a few minutes. So that's how this kind of the whole connection is working. Any questions? Okay.
Interesting. Is there a way that this can be even more real time? Like you said, in a few minutes, this will maybe I missed some pieces here, but just curious.
Yeah, so here's the thing. This is basically when you are analyzing this data. So this is, I mean, the idea is that you are getting these logs from all of these systems and you are pushing these logs into this massive analytics engine, and then you are getting insights from it. So it's not real time; it's near real time. You can say few minutes, but
Got it. Got it.
yeah. So I think that's the goal, because in 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 real time you may be using different tools. So let's say if you want to query the let's say you want to query the sensor data from an oil well, where every second is precious. In that case, probably your tool will be Azure Stream Analytics, and querying that, and then finding out if the oil well pressure has gone beyond the threshold or something like that. You know,
Got it. Got it. Yeah.
and you can query that in real time pretty much.
So
Um,
here behind the scenes, just for me to understand the behind the scenes working, there's some sort of macro batching going on. Is that a fair assessment or a fair statement?
yeah.
Uh,
So this, yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
I'm just thinking out loud, right? How, yeah, given that this may be larger data volume, so it has to be more effective, right? In how
Yeah.
it processes that, and it may wait a couple of seconds to lump it all together, and then it does the querying and do it so continuously. Is that how it works, or?
Yeah, so basically, this is the way it is doing it. It does its own indexing behind the scene, and then it is showing this data up, stores the data in the cache on the VMs, and that's how it is
Got it. Got
kind of
it.
displaying it. I mean, and to be honest, I am not kind of in depth into the working of the system. I'm more on the operational side. For example, if you ask me, hey, how I can increase the performance of it, what you can do is you can basically, let me go in here. I mean, you can basically go into where is the scale out? You can do a scale out. So basically increase the number of instances, or scale up, which is right now you're using this small instance. This is your current SKU. You can use very, very large instances. So
Right.
that's kind of increase the performance. And that's how this
Got it.
thing
Got it.
works.
I'm
So
surprised that this actually, I thought it's part of Synapse now. Is it still supported as a standalone?
yes, I mean, yes,
Okay,
it's a,
okay. I wasn't aware of that. I thought it's only in Synapse now. Okay, good to know.
yeah. So yeah, you can increase the, yeah. So I mean, different tools for different scenarios. Okay.
Yeah,
So we
but
have, yeah,
just to
go ahead.
be clear, this one here is the same as they integrated into Synapse, right? This is not different in terms of functionality. Is that correct?
I don't know, man. I can't answer
Okay.
that
No,
question.
no,
Yeah, I'm
no
not
worries,
familiar
no
with Snap.
worries.
As I said, my interaction with this is more from the operational side. That's why I
Got
put the
it, got it.
disclaimer that if you have data questions, I may not be the best person to answer.
No
So
worries, no
yeah,
worries.
yeah, yeah. Any other questions, folks? We have almost right on time.
Great session, my friend. That helped me out greatly.
Thank you. Wanted you so okay. So that's pretty much it. I mean, we already talked about briefly in terms of scale out and how you can set up scaling and all that. And uh, if with that, thank you very much, everyone, for joining, and hope to see everybody next week for another session of Azure Power Lunch. And I will upload the slide deck and the video to our usual destination. And hope everybody stay safe and have a wonderful weekend.